today we're going to look at some of the groups and activists fighting for the rights of the indigenous peoples of Brazil. For centuries, the indigenous peoples of Brazil have suffered genocide at the hands of invading Europeans who brought disease and murder. The rights of Brazil's indigenous communities have been trampled upon ever since, with politicians across the capitalist world treating their lives as disposable. These politicians and the corporations behind them do this because the indigenous way of life does not adhere to capitalist ideology, namely that every last thing on earth should have a monetary value to be exchanged. The respect indigenous peoples have for the earth and for the life it nurtures simply isn't compatible with capitalist dogma, which sees only land and people to exploit and sell to the highest bidder. One of the joys of learning a language is that it enables us to learn about things we wouldn't have been able to, simply because much of the information is in that language. Learning Portuguese can help bring the fight for the rights of Brazil's indigenous peoples to more people, raising awareness and growing support. This is also about celebrating the lives and cultures of Brazil's indigenous peoples. Many of the groups and activists mentioned provide fantastic resources about the history of Brazil's indigenous peoples, as well as their languages and customs. There shouldn't have to be a specific reason for preserving lives and cultures. It is a human instinct. But it's also worth noting, and particularly for anyone who may feel ambivalent about these causes, that the struggle for the rights of Brazil's indigenous peoples is inseparable from the struggle to stop climate breakdown. Indigenous peoples live in harmony with the earth, taking only what is necessary. As politicians continue to confiscate and exploit the land where indigenous peoples live, an array of habitats, biomes and ecosystems are being disrupted and destroyed. Indigenous causes are so important. It's merely a bonus that by learning about these causes you'll also be immersing in the Portuguese language and therefore improving your Portuguese. It also means that you'll eventually be able to learn indigenous languages. At the end of the video, we'll look at how to fit the time you spend immersing into a method and routine that will help you on your way to learning Portuguese. This video is part of a series of videos looking at resources you can use to immerse in Brazilian Portuguese. These are divided into various topics so that you can find resources for areas that interest you. The links will be in the description below. We'll focus mostly on groups in this video, but there are so many activists that links to most of them will be in the description below. Of course, the groups and activists mentioned here are just a starting point. There are many more fighting for the rights of Brazil's indigenous peoples. Hopefully with these links you should be able to find others. The groups and activists we'll be looking at are not listed in any particular order. They all do incredibly important work, and I'd recommend looking at as many of them as you can, and of course supporting these causes in any way possible, whether that be through subscribing to their channels or telling others about their work. The first group we're going to look at are Articulação dos Povos Indígenas. It was established in 2005 and operates in every region of Brazil. It seeks to unite the causes of all of Brazil's indigenous peoples and fight for their rights at a national or federal level. As part of their work, they provide a whole host of information, from documentaries to the latest news. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has spread a lot in Brazil in the wake of the government's neglect, and this has impacted Brazil's indigenous peoples. Loggers and miners regularly invade their lands, often bringing the disease with them. APIB does its best to keep track of the virus's spread and record the effect it is having on the indigenous communities. Some of this information can be found on their main site, although they are running a dedicated site for this purpose, both to record what is happening and to call for vaccinations and assistance. The site is called Emergência Indígena, and the link can be found in the description below. APIB also has a YouTube channel, which is a vital source of information on the indigenous peoples of Brazil, as well as their fight for justice. I'd highly recommend watching their documentary series, Maracá, which has been created during the pandemic to raise awareness of the indigenous struggle and how the Brazilian government has not only neglected them, but has made their situation worse. Sadly, this also applies to the rest of Brazil. The whole country has been neglected by the Brazilian government. The situation has deteriorated under the presidency of the far-right Jair Bolsonaro. This video was being recorded on the 2nd of May 2021, and in the last few days, news has broken in Brazil that the indigenous activist and politician Sônia Guajajara has been subpoenaed by the federal police under accusations of defaming the government. This was done at the request of FUNAI, Fundação Nacional do Índio, the very organisation who is supposed to protect, support and promote the rights of Brazil's indigenous peoples. The accusations of defamation have been brought in response to Sônia and APIB's video series, Maracá, which highlights the threats faced by Brazil's indigenous communities, which include federal policies. The news of the government's attempts to go after Sônia has quickly been followed by news that the federal police in the state of Rondônia have opened an inquest and have started contacting indigenous leaders of the Suruí people by telephone to ask questions. Among those questioned was Almir Suruí. The second group we're going to be looking at is Instituto Socioambiental. It was founded in 1994 and fulfills similar roles to APIB. For information about Brazil's indigenous peoples, either of these two would be a great starting point. Like APIB, Instituto Socioambiental has a wide range of information on its website and various social media channels, including an excellent YouTube channel where they organise regular live streams with indigenous leaders and other activists. These live streams are a fantastic way for people to come together behind the cause, both through the issues discussed and the live chat feature, which enables everyone watching to get involved, organise and learn more. They also do incredible work in promoting the languages and cultures of Brazil's indigenous peoples. One of the most recent examples of this was their publication on the languages of the Yanomami, a group of indigenous peoples in the north of Brazil and south of Venezuela. Here you can see the live stream they ran upon launching their free ebook on the languages of the Yanomami. I definitely recommend watching the video and downloading the ebook. The links will be in the description below. There's also a link to the webpage hosting the rest of their publications, which cover a wide range of important topics from indigenous cultures to the threats posed by COVID-19. The third group we're going to be looking at is Rádio Yandé, Brazil's first indigenous radio station. Rather than go through all the work the channel does and the topics it covers, I'd recommend checking it out for yourself, as it's an incredible project. They provide an array of radio programmes covering all sorts of topics, from indigenous culture to the latest news of Brazil's indigenous communities. Another fantastic goal of the station is to encourage indigenous communities to use the station as a way of showing people their cultures, languages, and to raise awareness for the continued fight for their rights. Here you can see an interview with Rádio Yandé's co-founder, Anapuaca Tupinambá, talking about indigenous cultures. The link is in the description below. The Tupinambá, like all of Brazil's indigenous peoples, are part of the story of the Brazilian Portuguese language. During Portugal's colonisation of Brazil in the 16th century, the Portuguese of the court in Lisbon remained the exclusive tongue of the colonial ruling class, such as in the law courts and the church. However, the colonisation and exploitation of Brazil's indigenous peoples, which was often done by evangelising missionaries, was conducted in what was known as the Língua Geral, or general tongue. This Língua Geral was essentially a creole of the most prominent indigenous language of the coastal region, which was Tupinambá. This was blended with an array of Portuguese vocabulary. From the earliest period of Portugal's involvement in Brazil, European Portuguese was thus perceived as the language of authority, used in formal settings and written correspondence, whilst daily interactions between colonisers and indigenous peoples were in the Língua Geral. Over time, and as these interactions occurred with more of the indigenous population, aspects of Portuguese grammar were simplified in spoken language as a means of aiding communication, a ubiquitous trait when two or more languages speakers seek to find a means of communicating with one another. This process was accelerated by the slave trade, which enslaved and transported an estimated 4.9 million people from Africa to Brazil between 1501 and 1866, more than any other country. The linguistic diversity of Brazil, comprised of hundreds of indigenous languages, those spoken by the enslaved from Africa, as well as the various regional dialects of the different Portuguese settlers, all contributed to Brazilian Portuguese. Another group we'll quickly look at is Coletivo Rondônia. They shed light on the fight for the rights of the indigenous peoples in the state of Rondônia, as well as the south of the state of Amazonas, and the northwest of the state of Mato Grosso. At the time of recording, they have accounts on Medium and Twitter, and links to these will be in the description below. More groups will be listed in the description of this video, but the last group we'll look at in the video itself is Survival International, and specifically Survival International Brazil. Survival International has been promoting the cause of Indigenous peoples throughout the world for decades, helping to raise awareness in places like England and the United States, where the ruling classes and their capitalist dogma continue to harm both their own citizens and Indigenous people throughout the world, not least in Brazil. If you're just starting out learning Portuguese and would like at least some information in English to begin with, Survival International is a useful option, as their website and social media is available in several languages. On a similar note, APIB's website is also available in English and Spanish. Finally, I'd like to mention Kaká Wera Jacupe. He is a writer and politician. I'd recommend reading one of his books, A Terra dos Mil Povos, Historia Indígena do Brasil contada por um índio, The Land of the Thousand Peoples, Indigenous History of Brazil, told by an Indian. As well as the history of Brazil's indigenous peoples, it also tells of their cultures, languages and beliefs. Links to more groups and activists can be found in the description below. I hope you found this video useful, regardless of whether you're learning Portuguese. If you are learning Portuguese, we'll now look at how to use immersion within a wider plan for learning the language. In terms of fitting the resources we've covered today into a plan for learning Brazilian Portuguese, there are 3 essential things you need to learn any language. These 3 things could be called different names based on personal preference, but they boil down to the same things. Now, these are the passive part of the process, the active part, and practice. The passive part of the process is perhaps most important in the sense that it's most likely to have been the missing ingredient, as when we learn languages at school, it's impossible to spend much time listening to the language in its normal form, at normal speed, and how it's used in daily life. And this is why, even though we perhaps learn how to conjugate some verbs and say a few sentences, when we actually hear the language properly in normal settings, we struggle to understand it. The active part is probably going to be the most familiar, in the sense that it does involve active study, but it doesn't have to be in the more traditional ways you may be used to from school. By all means, study grammar in isolation and verb tables if you enjoy that, as enjoyment is the most important thing, but you don't have to. The active part of the process for many people can just be a case of looking for new phrases and learning them, remembering them. Practice is just about having conversations, whether they're typed or spoken, with native speakers of that language or people who speak that language to the level of a first language. Ideally, anyway. Now, if at the start you're a bit tentative and want to develop your Brazilian Portuguese a bit more before having conversations, that's absolutely fine. You can just pose questions to yourself and think of how you'd respond and practice answering them. It may sound a bit odd at first, but it's absolutely fine and it is an effective way to improve. The most effective way for improving your fluency is to practice with other people, as it's the most immediate form and it will make your responses feel more automatic in future. But for many people, it can seem a bit daunting to start that straight away. Some people do advocate starting that straight away, but you don't have to. It's just personal preference. the coming weeks and months, there'll be more videos like this posted on this channel to help you learn Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese, as well as various other languages. If you'd like to look at some other free resources on the website, there's a resources section, and that gets added to weekly. There's general advice on language learning, and there's a tab specifically for Portuguese resources, focusing particularly on films you can watch to help improve your Portuguese, and each of these has links to relevant videos and articles that will add context to the film you've watched, and adding this context helps you to remember the phrases you've come across, and it just makes the whole process more enjoyable. If you'd like more detail on how to learn Portuguese, whether that's Brazilian Portuguese or European Portuguese, there's a How to Learn Languages guide, How to Learn Portuguese. Most of the resources in the book are centred on Brazilian Portuguese, but there are resources in there for European Portuguese as well. The guide goes into lots more detail, and it's a way for you to have everything you need in one place, with links to useful resources and a plan laid out for you. There's also a detailed section on the history of the Portuguese language. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful, and see you next time.